Well, hi everyone, and welcome to another great episode of Club Grubbery. And this is a cracker. I have spent, John, and I'm sure you have, quite a bit of time listening to our guest story, and it is a story that must be heard and understood by everyone around the world because
Mm.
it's clear, Johnny, that our governments are making us sick. Our governments are actually actively participating in killing the citizenry with health bureaucracies that are out of control, working in conjunction with big pharmaceutical companies for profit. We are in deep doo-doo in this country and around the world. And our guest today is Karen Kain. Karen, welcome from the States. Welcome from California.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Well, it's
I
an honor.
would there's not a lot I wouldn't do for your country, and I know a lot of moms, and we've been in contact for a long time, and I'm very happy to share my story to all the people who have heard it and haven't heard it again. It's important.
Mm. Absolutely, it is. John, how important is it that we cover off on this stuff? I mean, I've been talking with Charles McKenzie from Infected Blood Australia, and they have been experiencing medical tyranny for 30 years. Our governments are ignoring its people. Our health departments are ignoring its people. Health bureaucrats like Dr. Kerry Chant in New South Wales are destroying people's lives, and yours is one of those. You are one of her victims.
Mm.
Yeah, look, Hoodie, I think we could keep a program going for the next 30 years just on all the things that have happened. It's horrendous. I mean, you think of warp speed. I mean, it is warp speed. They're trying to kill us at warp speed. And that's absolutely for certain. I mean, you've only got to look at the amount of vaccines that were given in the 1980s compared to what's happening now. I mean, it's like sevenfold increase. It's like madness. So you can't tell me that there is some valid reason for all that. I mean, it is criminal.
It is. And we're so grateful uh, for Karen to come on and tell this story because this is a story that must be heard. It's an inconvenient truth for many of you who'll be watching. And I'm appearing on an SBS program, a mainstream media network, in a week's time, talking about my body, my choice. And it's encouraging that a mainstream network is wanting to talk about this. But what we're really gratified to know, Karen, that you've seen the episode that we did on Kiana and her children, who were abducted from her by Child Protection in Cairns. And this is something that you're so familiar with, isn't it?
It is, and years ago, because basically I lived in the hospital with my daughter, and that was from 94, she was injured, but for five till she was five, six, seven, we basically lived 1 year alone. We were 178 days in ICU, and I was doing very alternative things and I was doing modern medicine. But when I started hearing parents that they were afraid to go to the doctors, I felt that really concerning and I didn't really know what to think about it. But of course, as a mom, so many moms are like doctors now. There are many doctors, many nurses. They know what's going on. They know more than a lot of people do, a lot of medical community, because they can't be trained on this. So it really concerned me. But now I totally understand. And I thought of that when I was listening to that story, just about people are afraid to go to the ER. And I have a lot of friends that are in that same boat. They don't want to take their kid in because there's a threat. And here in the US, if there's a threat of giving birth at home and not, breastfeeding. They don't want you to breastfeed. It's become completely mad and it's just madness.
So, Karen, a lot
And
of people in Australia, I hate to admit that I hadn't known of your story until we realised that we were going to be interviewing you, and I've done a bit of research, and there's so much material out there that you've done. This all started for you with your daughter in 1994, and for people who don't know, you now have an opportunity to unpack this story again, probably for the millionth time, and we thank you for your grace in relation to that. And we want to say to our audience that this may well go to two episodes like we did with Dr. David Martin, because this is a story that needs to be told because it's an inconvenient truth. So, Karen, take us back to perhaps 1994, or let's even talk about, you came together as a family, you met your husband, and then you had this beautiful baby brought into your life, Lauren. Tell us a little bit about just pre what happened in 94, that how you were looking forward to whatever you were looking forward to, and take us on that journey.
when I got pregnant, me and my husband, we had, we talked about everything. We interviewed all the doctors in our area to see who would be the best doctor for our baby. And we did the stroller thing. We did everything that, most parents do. And it was 94, is before the internet. There was no talk about, vaccine injury or anything. It was just what I did. I showed up early. My daughter was 6 weeks old to give her the vaccine, very proud. And just having a baby girl who was healthy and beautiful was, was the happiest part of my life. I mean, it was just there's nothing, it was my dream. I didn't want to do anything else but be a mom. And I was very proud, and she happened to be very pretty. So I took her in at 6 weeks old to get her DPT vaccine. Just didn't even really think about it. And I felt safe because I knew the doctor was I think she had tons of licenses, and she was very, very smart. And Lauren had one vaccine. She had the DPT, the live vaccine. And I took her home and just, whatever, it's just what you do. And 2 hours after the vaccine, I was at my girlfriend's house, and she was going to actually watch my daughter so I could go back to work, which seems crazy now. But my daughter was sitting there, and she fell fast asleep, and the daughter said, give her Tylenol. Of course, we all know that whole story. And so I did, and then she just woke up screaming and shaking, and I grabbed her, and she was, 7.5 pounds. And she's screaming, and her hands were clenching, and her eyes were blinking, and she was screaming really loud. And my friend just kept yelling at me, "That's not right. That's not right." And when it was over, it was a long seizure. It felt like 5 minutes. I don't know. And maybe it was a minute. I don't even know, but it always felt like 5 minutes because she had very long seizures. So I handed her to my friend, and I just ran to the bathroom, and I got sick. And I just knew something was seriously wrong. So I called the doctor, and it was lunchtime. So I went back and sat outside on the floor outside of the doctor's office because they were closed because they were out for lunch. And she came, and she brought me in right away, and we put Lauren, and we laid her down on the table. And then Lauren started doing it again. She just started screaming and shaking. And so this is now 4 hours after the DPT vaccine. And I just started yelling at the doctor. I was like, stop it, make it stop, make it stop. And I was just freaking out. Now I'm just completely afraid of my daughter. I don't know what's going on. I've never seen a seizure before, never been in the hospital. And just clearly there's something very, very wrong. And the doctor told me to take her to the hospital. And it seems so strange now looking back, like I can't even believe I took her in the car by myself when we went to the hospital that was close by, but whatever. And we ran all the tests, and then people kept just saying, sometimes babies have seizures after vaccines, which of course I never heard that. And nothing came wrong. We did the blood draw. We stayed the night. I think we stayed 2 nights in the hospital. My husband was out of town at the moment, and which of course makes it harder. And I just remember at 6 a.m., the lab guy coming in to take her blood, and I'm just holding her little tiny body down, and he drew blood, and I just had no idea at that point how that would become just part of my life. I'm so sorry. So sorry. I don't know why that's happening. So it just changed everything. And so then she didn't have another seizure for 14 days. And then, sorry, I'm just going to turn my phone off because I don't know why this is doing this. I don't know. Anyways, okay. So she didn't have a seizure for 14 days. And so we kind of thought, okay, because, they said it's vitamin B, and everyone was saying it could be just, people have seizures, kids have seizures after vaccines. It's no big deal. And then on the 14th day, I think it was at nighttime. It was at nighttime, and then she started screaming. And you have to just understand she's this little tiny, tiny thing, and she's shaking and screaming. And we called 911, and the ambulance came, and she was still shaking when they got there. And I could tell by the look on the ambulance driver's face that they were afraid of her. And we went into the hospital, and the doctor was saying, well, it could be a vitamin B level that's low. And he wanted to give her phenobarbital. So my daughter was, 8 weeks old. She was injured at 6 weeks old. She's 8 weeks old, and now we're starting her on phenobarbital. And then by the time she was 3 months old, it was Memorial Weekend, and she had 9 5-minute seizures in one day, and her body was just lifeless. And I kept calling the doctor. And so, we had this neurologist, we don't really know what's going on, but I kept calling the neurologist. And um, every time she had a seizure, and then finally, it was like he was irritated with me because I just kept calling him. She's had another one. She's had another one. And so then we brought her in, and she was 3 months old. She had 9 seizures that day. We checked in the hospital for, I think we were there 14 days. And like we were a couple days into it, and she was still seizing, and they started giving her, I think that day we gave her Dilantin. So my daughter's 3 months old. She's taking Dilantin and she's taking phenobarb. And I'm walking down the hall, and Lauren's eyes just seem to be like not looking. She's not looking around, and she's not, how little babies are. She just like her vision just kind of checked out. And so I told the doctor, I said, something was weird. She just doesn't, she's not looking at me. She's not engaging. And she's 3 months old. And all we've heard at this point is that babies sometimes have seizures after vaccines. And he's standing there, and he has this, it's a teaching hospital. It's in Orange County, California. And he has all these white coats with him. And he walks over to Lauren, and he picks up, she's laying in her crib, and he picks up a toy and he takes it over her eyes, like if you were to do, which neurologists do all the time, to see if she's tracking. And he just looks at me and he goes, "Mrs. Kain, your baby's retarded. Look at the way she is. Look at the way her hands are holding. She's retarded." And I just stood there, and I was by myself. My husband was at work, and he just kind of walked out of the room. I mean, I don't even know because I don't remember anything else he said. And he walked out of the room, and he just like sucked the air out. And I called her father, and I was just, of course, he wasn't there. I was telling his secretary, I'm like, I gotta talk to him. I gotta talk to him, you know. And then when Tom got on the phone, I just said, "They're saying she's gonna be retarded." And he was just, he was just like yelling at me. He's like, "You tell them they don't know what they're doing, and they don't know what they're talking about. And she's too pretty, da da da." These crazy thoughts that go through parents' minds. But and then we kind of shifted into denial. And so at 3 months, she's on 2 anti-seizure medications. I think for a little bit, she stopped having seizures because she was having just so many seizures. She, and I know a lot about seizures, like you just become numb to it. And we ended up getting a second opinion from a UCLA adult neurologist. And because the doctor that told me about her said, "I think you should get a second opinion." Because, of course, we're in denial. And, I think every parent hates that doctor. And I think he was extremely inappropriate the way he talked to me. And so we went to UCLA, and it was pouring down rain. It's like an hour drive. And we get in there, and we're just so nervous. And, this is our hope. And the doctor comes in, and he looks like a madman. He's got gray hair and beard and his white jacket. And he just picks Lauren up, and he starts like dragging her across the table, and her legs aren't doing what's appropriate. Like they should be automatically picking up and acting like she's walking. She doesn't engage at all. And then he puts her down, and he says, "At least she'll be a pretty retard and she won't do this." And he starts shaking. And I was just like, I'm already numb from the situation. And I have a 3-month-old baby. I had a cesarean. So like everything is numb in my life. And then he says it again. He goes, "Well, she won't do this." And he does these movements. And then we just took her and left. I don't remember anything else about that visit. And we drove home in the rain, and I was just literally thinking family suicide. I was devastated. There are no words. The person I was then is not the person I am now, but this is the worst possible thing that could happen to any parent. Certainly, had no skills to be a parent of a child that might embarrass me in public. Let's say that. And so they went to the third opinion. I was by myself, and then we went to Children's Hospital this time. And this visit, the doctor doesn't even touch her. He looks at the records because, of course, I had everything. And we're sitting at a table. It's a teaching hospital, Los Angeles Children's Hospital. And he doesn't even touch her. And then all his other doctors are sitting there, and he just looks at me. He goes, "I would suggest that you go home and prepare for the worst." And I was just, "What does that mean?" He goes, "Prepare for the worst." And I said, "When will I know?" And he said, "When she's a year old." And that, I can't even, I can't even begin to explain to you what that does to a person, a mother, who doesn't have a doctor-patient relationship with anybody. And so I took her home and I actually went, I went to the office. I said, "Do I owe you any money?" I didn't know if I was paying. I'm in this fog. And then I said, "Do you have a cigarette?" I wasn't smoking, but I was like, I just want to smoke. I do want to do something because I'm so out of my body and I'm so just overwhelmed with pain and sadness and grief. And so she gives me a cigarette. I think I'm like, "Do you have a lighter?" I don't have anything. I don't even know why, but I just remember being so dazed. So I walk her to the car and I go, I'm driving home because that's like an hour again. And that information, just every single year, Lauren, she's now at like 4 months old, 5 months old. So when it comes to the year, and her birthday was in March, like December, I start just becoming incredibly depressed. And of course, her father, we're the dynamics between parents and kids with disabilities. I mean, it's like, 95 and if not more, divorce rate. I mean, it's just people grieve differently. We were grieving differently. And I just would start thinking, okay, well, if she doesn't do this, and so she would get like a little bit of gains, but then she'd have all these seizures and set her back. And so we started medicine, hopping, trying this and trying that and doing this, and we just tried everything on her, and she just kept having seizures and more seizures. And then the good thing about that initial visit in in May at Children's Hospital was I met a doctor there. And I looked at him and I thought he was crazy because he came and he actually kind of at the time, I mean, when your life is altered like that, there's so much fog going on. You don't really know what's going on. And he kind of pulled me in the side room. And at this point, I was writing down what I ate and what she ate because I was breastfeeding in the beginning, and how many seizures she had. I was just writing everything down. So I had just like paper bags. I just everything that people would tell me, I just wrote down. It was this like a whole new study, right? And he just said, this looks like a very typical vaccine injury. And there's a vaccine injury compensation program that you should know about. And I want to give you that information. But one, he didn't
Karen,
tell me in front of.
if I can just pause you there, had you at any stage prior to him telling me that thought that it might have been the vaccine?
No, no one talks about that. Of course not. And no one talked about the vaccine causing the injury. And of course not. And then, there's no internet. There's no Facebook group. There's no anything that I could to correlate or to ask people information. And so when he pulled me aside, he told me about the vaccine injury compensation program. And he said, this is looks like a typical injury because the vaccine injury compensation program was created basically because of the pertussis vaccine. And that's what Lauren had. And she was, developing encephalopathy. The vaccine gave her severe brain damage. And so I called her father because I'm living at the hospital. I never leave her side. We lived in the hospital for a long, long time. I never leave her side. And I said, this doctor, I think he might be crazy, but he's telling me about this compensation program that you can apply for it. And then they help you and take care of your kid if they're injured, because we all know when you go in and you're supposed to sign a paper saying that if you're vaccine injured, it's 1 in 250,000, right? That's what is said on my paper. That vaccine injury was 1 in 250,000, that the government will step in and help you and help take care of your baby and compensate you for your expenses. And so it kind of like split off there. We're in denial still, so we still have hope that Lauren's going to get better. And then Tom goes into talking to the lawyer. There were two lawyers in California, and we contacted with one that was nearest to us. And I started taking, of course, I'm learning what a CC is and what an ML is, and I'm like, I didn't know they're different. I mean, they're the same. There was so much, medications and therapies and support groups. And so I really dug deep into all of that. So I'm doing searching out for other parents, and it's very difficult without the internet, and learning about medicine, learning about therapies. Lauren's immediately in speech and language because I'm such a pain in the neck. I would just call because they said, well, she's at risk for delay, saying lightly. And so I just called every day. I said, my daughter needs therapy. She's injured and she has brain damage. And, it was all really about blaming the parent, blaming the child. It was never talked about that it was a vaccine injury. And so what did I do? I started writing to Oprah, Phil Donahue, Now, all of those programs that were active on TV that you see that are like supporting, people in their crisis. And so I wrote to everybody, and I put her picture on the envelope. I put the picture on the paper, and I had it on purple paper, and just as much attention as I could get for someone to look at it and go, okay, maybe I should read this. I think two people wrote me back, and I wrote to everybody. I wrote to everybody. And two people wrote back, and one just said that they couldn't help us. And the other, yeah, they both were just like, yeah, we're not touching it. And another thing happened very early on is that one TV station did contact me, and they said, we want to do an interview, and we're going to pick you up in a limo, and you're going to come and be interviewed. We want you on television and all this stuff. And then he called me back, I think an hour or two later, and he said, if I have you on my show, I'll have 100 lawsuits on my desk in the morning. I can't interview you. And so that was that. And that was a major network, but it was just like, well, we can't talk about you. And then we'd go to the emergency room. And I remember telling one of the doctors, I said, well, she's vaccine injured. And she goes, well, that's not what her neurologist said. So no one would admit it. No one would talk about it. Her father started with a vaccine injury compensation lawyer, and there was a lot of laws. I think they're pretty similar to now, but if we had not spent $1,000 out of pocket, we wouldn't have qualified for to be even considered. You have to have the injury a certain number of days after the vaccine. And so we had to videotape her. We had all these medical records. And I was the busy beaver doing therapy chairs. So because I had Lauren, and then she was born in March, so I had Lauren cesarean, and all of our expenses were paid for. So the only reason we met that $1,000 that needed to be spent was because I bought a therapy chair for her. Otherwise, we would have never even qualified. It's so crazy. And so we're applying for the vaccine injury compensation program, and that was a whole different kind of hell personally. I mean, I wasn't really involved in that so much because I was so busy taking care of her, and she's, doing therapies and everything. And all my friends are going on with their healthy babies, and my family has their healthy babies. And I basically can't do anything because Lauren's having seizures. If I try to go somewhere, we're going to probably end up in the hospital. And everywhere we did go, we ended up in the hospital. Every state we visited or country, we ended up in the ER because she would have such crazy seizures. And her brain was so severely damaged. And, when the brain doesn't work, the body doesn't work. So she was cortically blind. She was nonverbal. She had no head or trunk control. She ended up with a feeding tube. She ended up with the fundoplication, so you don't aspirate into your lungs. Or she didn't, but that's what a fundoplication is for. They wrap the esophagus tightly. And then she ended up with a trach. And then we went back and did this crazy, crazy thing when she was 5. We did a tracheal diversion and this is so extreme, and it's never done. And most doctors have no idea what it is, but it was one of those things that I came across. And so we severed Lauren's vocal cords at 5, and we pouched her airway so she only breathed out of the hole in her neck. And so what that did is it made so she wouldn't swallow into her lungs. So at this point, at 3, she started just constantly swallowing into her lungs. And so she had pneumonia. So she's having seizures, she's having pneumonia. And then when we did the fundoplication, it stopped that from happening. And it's extreme. And so the thing that made her so medically fragile was because of her air, that hole in her neck would get plugged, she would suffocate. So later in life, I looked, because I need to have it part of my will, like if I died, who would take her, what hospital would take her, and it would be $6,000 a day for her to be cared for in a hospital. And that's how medically fragile she was. And this is you know, she died 16 years ago. So, so things were very, very crazy. And I just want to say, because always people judge, and people would look at me and say, oh, she probably drank or something, she did something to cause that. And the other thing is, people would say, is like, why are you keeping her alive? Why are you wasting our money? Why is she at school? All of these things that people look at and think, she doesn't have a value and she's not important. And the first time that we had to, what happens, because her airway would get so constricted that you'd have to intubate, meaning put a tube in her throat to open her airway. And the first time we had to do that, I didn't want to do that. And we were at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, and her dad was at work, and they're saying, your daughter's dying now. And I was there, and it was a crazy story. I wrote about it in my book, but I just said no. Why are we prolonging? This is a horrible situation. I'm plowing medication into her. She never slept. She cried till she was 5. I mean, it was really, really hard. And I didn't want to intubate her. I didn't want to prolong what the inevitable was. Because of course I thought about it all the time, like what's to come of her, what's to come of me and my marriage. And her dad said, do everything, do everything. And so, when you get married or you're with someone, you never think that. And then we'd go back home, and then we'd have to start it again. And so she just kept getting intubated at the hospital. So in 1998, we were 178 days in ICU, and I never left. And I knew everybody. I knew all the ambulance people, all the nurses and the doctors and everything. So we'd go to one hospital, the local hospital, then we get transferred to the next hospital, and at Cedars, and that was our life. And then after we agreed to do the tracheal diversion, which seemed extremely crazy to do to keep this child alive. But the problem is the doctors were saying, well, she's not dying because you take such good care of her. And wasn't that, it was just hard. Like there would be times I'd walk out of the room fully expecting her to be dead when I came back, but she just wasn't dying, and I wasn't going to neglect her. So we did the tracheal diversion, and then we had to rebuild her hips, and then we put a vagal implant in, and then we had to put a rod in her spine. And then about 7 years old, she kind of got strong, and she wasn't sick, and then she started having a really amazing life. And we're mirroring that. We're going through the vaccine injury compensation program. And so that's a pretty hairy thing. And so it's probably like a whole different show, but briefly, for people that don't understand that, I think it was around 1962 when the pharmaceutical companies started saying we don't want to make these the vaccines anymore because we keep getting sued. And so the biggest reason the 1986 Act was started is because of the pertussis vaccine, and that's what my daughter had. And the drug companies said, we don't want to make vaccines anymore because they're not making any money. I mean, it's, people forget this isn't, or they just don't know. Vaccines aren't about your health. It's a money thing. And so our government stepped in and said, you continue to make the vaccines and we'll make it so they can't sue you. So the only vaccines that are on this schedule that's protected by the government are the childhood vaccines, the ones that are mandatory. And so in 1980, I think that it was 12% chronic illness, and there were 10 vaccines given. And that was the ones, I'm 62, so I had the polio, I had the MMR, right, back in the day. And then now we have 78 vaccines until you're 18. And we have, I think I just saw, I'm going to stick with 56, but we have like 54% chronic illness. But I think RFK Jr. just said that we have 66% chronic illness. So here the drug companies aren't liable. And so you have to sue the government. So this is not an issue between you and the pharmaceutical companies. And our kids have never been sicker. And so when my daughter was having seizures, that was very rare. And today, last I heard, one in 20 kids has a seizure disorder. And I don't even know, like, the thing about, I think the autism rate is 1 in 23, but it depends on what state you're in, and I'm sure country. And the thing is that when you get these statistics, they're not extrapolated out. They're basically, they don't kind of label a child with autism until they're 7. So if you extrapolate it back, these stats are way, way more concerning. And we know, I mean, years ago, you could go anywhere almost and not see a child with earphones on, or, stimming, or just completely zoned out, or having a breakdown. Our children are sick today, and there's just a lot of information out today, but we're still very censored, but there is information. And of course, RFK Jr.'s book, The Truth About Anthony Fauci, is a great audiobook because it's quite large, but it talks all about that. Dr. Suzanne Humphreys, who was kicked out of Australia with polytomy, she has a great book about dissolving illusions, about vaccines, and each vaccine, it breaks down what it was made for, the history of it, why it started and why it ended. And so there's a lot of information. You have to look, and so that's why I share my story, because people need to understand I didn't think it was going to happen to me, and it did. And then, if you want to say, let's just say that Lauren took a hit for the team, right? She was injured. She took a hit for all those other healthy kids. Then she should have been held up in esteem, and she should have been treated with honors. And that is not what happens in vaccine court. So we're in vaccine court. So Lauren's still having seizures, and my husband's actively drinking a lot, and my life is out of control. It's just unimaginable. I can't work. I can't go to the store hardly. I can't do anything because Lauren would just have these huge episodes. Before the trach, she was turning blue till she passed out. After the trach, she was seizing and still sick and having all these things. And at this point, she's taking about 6 anti-seizure medications a day, still actively having seizures all the time. She's got pulmonary issues like crazy. And we show up to court. And so it's important for people like the young moms now, they can't even understand, and it's not their fault, but without the internet, there was nothing. There's no connection. I'm not talking to anybody who has had a kid with vaccine injury. I'm alone. And that's the way HHS liked it, right? Because you can't share stories, you can't connect with people. And so the internet really created such a strong group of parents to share information. And so what happens is the ways that the government protects their vaccine injury compensation program is that there's no internet, so there's no connection. You don't get due process. So the only place in America where you don't get due process, and due process means a court and a jury. So you don't get a judge and a jury. We were taken by ourselves. So we go to our court, and there's someone who's a special master, and that's the judge, and it's actually an attorney who's acting judge, and they call them special masters. So you're in a private room. So there's the special master, there's the stenographer, there's me and Lauren's father, there's our attorney, and we had a life care planner. And so the government, this is what they do full time. They have all the funds. So there's plenty of money for their attorneys. And excuse me. And so they have their doctors that they do this all. This is what they do. This is a full-time job. And we had Nurse Fox, and she was horrendous to me. So we spent 3 days, and what happens is you have to decide how much money Lauren's life is worth. So we show up and we sit down, and of course, I'm so stressed out. My kids, I'm never away from my kid, and she's at home, I'm sure, having seizures, and it was just messy. And now I got to sit here and talk about money, about my baby, and I still have hope that she's going to get better. I mean, how can you not? And so we had 85 items, and it just came out. And the first thing that the government says, so the government's representing, because there's no drug companies there, because they don't have to do anything. They don't have to be there. They don't care. I'm just arguing with the government HHS lawyers, and this is what they do full time. So they open the room and they say, Mrs. Kain, you need to place your daughter in a home. She won't need a chair. She'll have a bed and she'll have a wheelchair. And so place her in home and walk away. That's what they offer first. And of course, I say no. And then we start arguing. Okay, so we say, we want a wheelchair. Well, you only get a wheelchair a certain number of times, and your insurance is going to pay for a wheelchair. So we don't need to pay for a wheelchair for these years, only after she's 18 or something. You know, there's all these loops. So everything you ask for, they say no. It's all about money. So we get, this is the famous story, but it kind of sums it up how I was treated. And we get to the point, and I wanted Huggy baby wipes. And they started saying, how many times do you change your daughter every day? And how many wipes do you use when you change her? And why do you want Huggy's wipes? And we're doing this for like 20 minutes. And of course, now I would never even argue that. But at the time, that's what my life was. Lauren was, and most every child who's vaccine injured is constipated or has diarrhea. So she was constipated or had diarrhea. So diapers and wipes are a huge part of my life. And so they finally just said, Mrs. Kain, why do you want Huggy's wipes? And I said, because they're thicker. Like, because they didn't want to pay like $3.50 for wipes. They wanted to pay $2.50 for wipes. And it's just like so crazy. But this just kind of sums it up how we're talking. And so everything was an argument. And we did that for 3 days. And then because Lauren was so sick at that time, they, you know, whatever you say, they're going to say no, and they have to argue. So it doesn't matter anything. And so we wait and we put it in, and then they just kept putting it off and putting the settlement off. So they had agreed at some point what her life was worth. You get $250 for lost wages, or Lauren got $250 for lost wages, and she got $250 for pain and suffering. And this is the same time that I think there was a McDonald's lawsuit that they got $4 million or something. And then you get like an annuity. So every year you get what they think is appropriate for that year. She'll need a wheelchair every 5 years, or she needs a van with a ramp, and all these things are factored into it. And the thing with Lauren is she was so sick, every doctor would just say she was going to die. And so they just kept putting the lawsuit off, because if she would have died before the lawsuit, they would have owed $250,000 or less. And so they just kept postponing it and postponing it and postponing it. And the first time that I ever met the people from HHS, meaning the lawyers and the doctor, we were supposed to meet at my house, but because Lauren was so sick, we were always in the hospital, we're in ICU. So we'd have a meeting, we have to cancel. So finally they say, we're just going to come to the hospital and meet you. So fine. And I don't think anything of it. And so I'm standing there, ICU, there's bad coffee, and every parent's in there wearing sweats. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm holding my coffee and my sweats, standing next to my attorney, and they come over, hello, Mrs. Kain, and they walk over to Lauren. And I was just like, what are they doing? So they start taking her clothes off. And I said to my attorney, I was like, what are they doing? And I'll never forget. And he just looked at me and he goes, oh, honey, these people aren't your friends. They're here to prove that you're a bad parent. And so even after Lauren was injured, and they admit that she's injured, their first thing when they look at her is to try to prove that I'm not taking care of her well, so they can hold that against me and however take whatever. So it's just crazy. And so the thing, and the sad thing is that nobody wins in vaccine court. I mean, that's the truth. But the also true is that we were very lucky that we did get awarded. They awarded her in 1998, and and they paid for her medical expenses for the rest of her life. Every 2 years we had to go to the court, and so I would just have to write down every penny I spent, why I spent it. So it was just QuickBooks, everything that I did. They looked at everything, and which is fine, but it's very complicated. So another way that the HHS protects themselves is that every state is done differently. So it's like with the marijuana laws here in the US. So every state has its own law. So if I'm filing in California, someone filing in New York might have a totally different makeup. And so none of them are comparable. And at that point, there was no internet to compare. And Lauren was injured 31 years ago. Next month, she'll be 31. And I've talked to maybe one person that's ever talked to me about money and the lawsuit. So there's this thing that separates us even more, is that we can't just have a conversation and go, well, you should do this and you should do this, because we're always separated as parents, even after the internet. And these poor attorneys who represent these children, they are treated so horribly. And I was treated so horribly going through the court proceedings. Their nurse Fox, who still works for HHS, she was so incredibly horrible to me. The special master almost kicked her out of the room. She was so rude, and she would say, "Mrs. Kain, I don't know any parent who wants a hospital bed in their house." It's like it was just like complete madness. Anything I said, she would just attack me, and it's just to break. She was just to break me, like we're not broken enough. Um, I never had more kids. My husband and I separated. He ended up dying. We were just talking about this yesterday. He died. I don't remember the exact year that he died, but um, he lost his job. He wasn't able to cope. We, of course, weren't communicating. We couldn't see, everybody grieves differently. And he died home alone and wasn't found for 2 weeks. And it's just devastating. I mean, vaccine injury destroys lives. It destroys the injured and their family, and on and on. And it's just such a horrible, horrible thing. I also want to say that's really important to me, so people understand that, Lauren was also a blue-eyed, blonde-haired Pisces. She loved fashion, she loved chocolate, she had a personality. Even though she was stuck in her body, she could blink for yes and do thumbs up. And she went to school. And when she was 12, she ended up having best friends and meeting kids at school. And of course, that was a full-time job for me. I didn't have other kids. And so, my whole life was geared towards making her life the best she could do. And so I wrote a book about that, and it's called A Unique Life Fully Lived. And, I just believe personally that Lauren came here to do this, and she was such a brave, brave little girl. And she never complained, and she just fought really, really hard to be here. And she loved people, and she loved God. And she's just really a special girl. And so that's why I share the story, because I don't want anyone else to have to go through that. I don't I don't want anyone else to ever have to go through the suffering of watching their child losing financially everything. And we were lucky because we were awarded, but people aren't awarded. I mean, the 1986 Act, that's a whole probably show in itself that you could have Dr. Wakefield on. I mean, because the way it was written is not in the spirit of the way the law is being carried out. They're attacking parents. The lawyers are treated horribly. And if you were a lawyer, I certainly wouldn't want to represent children who are vaccine injured, because the people who work for the government, HHS, they have all the resources, and there's a lot of other information regarding that. So, should I just talk about the ACCV now? Shift to that, since
Yeah, look, I think
quite.
I think that comprehending everything you've just said has been it's a trial. It's a trial because, John, I feel like the government is not working in our best interest. We've known that for a long time. And it's the same narrative in the States as it is here. And the way you're talking about being treated, Meryl Dorey and Anita Huffmeister from the Australian Vaccine Risk Network have been copying this for 30 years, like you've been copying this for 30 years. The infected blood scandal people have been copying this for 30 years. It just seems like when we work with the government, because I'm from the government, I'm here to help, right? When we work along with these people, we are treated abysmally. And when we stand up against them, we are treated abysmally. There's a whole lot about this story that we need to unpack, and I want to go more into that. But John, how are you feeling at the moment about what you've heard?
Well, it's difficult to comprehend it, Woody. I mean, just even outside of the whole vaccine stuff. I mean, even just your experience, Karen, in the health system, by those people that are there to help. I mean, it wasn't a pleasant experience, regardless of anything to do with the vaccines. I mean, what you were talking about when you were taking Lauren just to be assessed at the hospitals is not a good story. And I mean that just demonstrates that this stuff's going on not only with regard to vaccine injury, but anyone turning up at a hospital can experience this dreadful customer service, and it affects your outcomes. I mean, look, one of the questions I was going to ask you, Karen, I mean, when you went there, and obviously there was a complete denial that there wasn't any mention of the vaccine, what did that do in relation to them running the rest of the vaccines? Did you continue to, was there a continuation of the delivery of those other vaccines in that period?
No, no, we didn't. And I was very, very lucky. In many ways, I was lucky. I mean, there is that, there's tragedy, and I have PTSD, like all parents do from vaccine injury. But I ended up, when she was a year old, we moved, and I ended up with a great pediatrician who still believes in the vaccine schedule. And I love her doctor. And he was, yeah, why? Let's not do that. And I think one time, there was something going on. Oh, we were going to do steroids on her, which that's another nightmare. And if you're on steroids and you get, I think, the chicken pox, it will kill you. And so I remember being in his office going, well, should we give her the chicken pox vaccine? Like that was, she was very young. She was like 2. So, and I, I'm not anti-vaccine at the time. I just know that this vaccine hurt her. So I'm not, it wasn't until after she died that I got so into the autism community. But so he's like, no, I just don't think we should give it. And we talked about everything. I mean, he'd bring her charts out, and I'm like, is that her chart? And he goes, no, that's just one of her charts. I mean, she was so complicated, and he was such a great man, is a great man. And so we did have some great experiences, but it was very, very difficult. There was a lot of really tough experiences, and it's very hard. And had I not, I never left her side. So had I left her at the hospital, she'd probably be dead. My doctor told me, he said, you could put her in a home. And he said, well, she'll die, but you could put her in a home. I mean, so it's like choice, no choice. And I don't judge any parent. That's not my point. For me, I didn't have other kids. So I didn't have, I had moms in the ICU. They have 5 kids at home, and they're living with the cancer kid, So it's devastating when you don't have your health. It's devastating. However you work it out. But Lauren was everything to me. She was my life. And I wasn't able to have other kids because I was so involved with her, which is painful now that I don't have a kid alive. So there's just so much to it, and there's so little support at the time. And the thing after she died, and I think it's like a perfect storm. So Lauren happened to be pretty, and I happened to be aggressive and a controller. So I think that makes you a better caregiver personally. But so I'm on top of everything. And I started speaking at schools and stuff because I was really involved in giving Lauren the best quality of life and decorating her room and I took her tent camping. I mean, I did crazy stuff. We swam with the dolphins. And so I was trying to give her the best quality of life. And so after she died, I remember Etta Ranga from Autism One called me. And so Lauren was so severely injured. She wasn't autistic, but I think she would have been had she been healthier, which may or may not make sense. But he called me, and they were doing the 1322 project, Ed and a bunch of great guys that now I'm friends with. And they were asking me about the vaccine and all this stuff. Like, she got vaccine injured, she got compensated, and then does she has autism? And I was like, no, she had just died like within that last year. And so that really brought me into the autism community because we didn't fit anywhere. Lauren was a lone duck. So I couldn't, we'd walk in a room and we didn't really fit with healthy kids because she wasn't healthy. But my attitude was that she was perfect the way she was. And then we walk in, with disabled kids, but we didn't really fit there because of my attitude about how that she's perfect. So it was very isolating, which is all part of, what works for HHS. Keep everybody home and broke alone and without internet. That was their best time, I'm sure. And then I was asked to speak and tell my story about Lauren at an Autism One conference. And this is something that had been going on. And Ed Arango and Terry Arango were the founders, and they own Autism One, amazing people. So I show up and I don't know anybody really with autism. And I speak and I have this video and I'm talking and I'm so desensitized because I've seen Lauren have all these seizures that I show a video of Lauren having a seizure when she's like 3 months old and cleared the room, crying everywhere. And because this is what everyone was experiencing, but nobody had at that point ever videotaped it and showed it. So I'm talking about my experience of a parent with vaccine injury. All these parents want to go through vaccine court, and there's a whole omnibus issue that's a whole different show. But and so all these parents have been denied compensation. They all want compensation, and I'm telling them how I've been treated so horribly by our government, that's the 1986 is supposed to act as supposed to, take care of parents with vaccine injury. And then it started me really into the autism community and speaking at Autism One and speaking at a lot of different events and talking about Lauren's story. And then I traveled to Singapore and I traveled all around the US talking about, friendships, vaccine injury, and how to care for yourself and how moms should take care of themselves. That was a huge topic that I spoke about for a long time. And then, just really slid back into the autism and the moms and what's going on. And so I became, well known in the community, wrote my book, talked about the book. And then when Lauren's father, of course, was no longer alive, and I ended up marrying a British guy, and he left the marriage. And so I was just like, had so much grief and felt abandoned again. And I just really didn't know what to do. And so I ended up walking the Camino Santiago. So I walked 500 miles carrying a backpack in honor of the vaccine injured children. And this was before COVID. So this, I just start walking and I start writing about my story and about people that I met. And this is a big part of Gardasil time and Vaxxed had come out. And so Lauren's seizures and Vaxxed. And so I had known Andy from the community and just so many amazing people. Dr. Suzanne Humphreys I met Anita, and Polly Tommy and I become good friends because now I'm knee deep in autism, but Lauren wasn't autistic or even labeled. They're just very separate. And so then I get a letter or a message, and I'm asked to be on the board of the advisory commission, on childhood vaccines. And so the 1986 Act created, part of that act and part of the law is that they create a commission managed by the government, and it's called the ACCV. And the job is to basically have 9 different members, commissioners, and there's doctors and lawyers, doctors of the vaccine manufacturer. There's supposed to be 2 parent positions filled, and one position of the public. And and I was asked to be on that board. So this is a time that, I've done my book, I'm getting older, and, I'm speaking all over, and, nobody in this community has any money. I mean, in the old days, that nobody was making money off autism, when I was in this. And so I agreed to apply to be on the board of the ACCV. And this board meets quarterly. Its job is to make vaccines safer, and the meetings are open to the public. So somehow, I don't even have any idea what they were thinking, they allow me to be on this board. And Teresa Ringham, and she's the one who asked me if I would serve. And she says, I watched you speak and you're very articulate. And, I think this would be really good. And you could, help raise awareness and help vote. You vote on things and stuff. And It's a 3-year position, and I can't even begin to tell you, like RFK Jr. just got his stuff handed to him from the Senate. And that's how every quarterly meeting was for me on this board. So I'm there as a parent. They're by law, they have to have 2 parent positions filled. And the entire time I was on that board, only 1 position was filled. And there was as many as 4 members only on the board. There's by law supposed to be 9. So what the ACCV does is that they get the people that used to serve on the board, or they get their doctors and their vaccine manufacturers, so we can have a quorum, so we can make votes and do things. But most of the time that I was on that board for 3 years, there was only 4 members on the board, and that did a couple things. One, I didn't have any parent support, and the first year John Howie was on there, and he became chair, and we connected because there were so many shenanigans that they do.
Well, apologies, ladies and gentlemen. We did have a technical glitch there, and we're coming back to the program now. We're going to make this 2 episodes, so bear with us. You were talking, Karen, about your involvement in this committee.
It's the ACCV board, and my daughter died 16 years ago, and so I didn't have any connection with the autism community, except that my daughter was injured and I was an advocate and I was a voice, and her story is like the perfect storm, right? And so I was getting very tired, but when I was invited to be on the board, I felt like for all the children who have been vaccine injured and their families and what they did, I thought that would be an opportunity for me to give back and to help. And I think that they had no idea what a troublemaker I was going to be on that board. Otherwise, they would have never invited me, because they don't really want that. And I got on the board. It was pretty intense, and it was pretty crazy, and it started a whole different part of advocacy for me.
Well, that's where we want to start episode 2 off with, and this story is a lot for our viewers to comprehend. It is a hard story to hear, but it's a story that needs to be heard. Clearly, government does not act in the best interests of the people anymore. That stopped a long time ago. I'm from the government. I'm here to help. No, I'm from the government. I'm here to make you sick. That's what we're seeing now, and we can see why. And we'll unpack a lot more of that. And we're going to bring a wonderful lady who's the head of the Australian Vaccine Risk Network, Anita Huffmeister. She'll be joining us in episode 2. So we strongly recommend that you come back for episode 2, ladies and gentlemen. And I just want to say, Karen, you're an absolute blessing. It's such a joy to have you on. Johnny, you've often been heard to say,
You just couldn't make this stuff up.
you just couldn't make this stuff up. Stay with us, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll have you back into this story when we next meet on Club Grubbery. We'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.